Okay, let's let's talk about the generative AI DLSS5 Instagram filter nonsense that's been making the rounds over the last few days. Now, as I have said before when it comes to this kind of topic, I am not an artist, so I don't plan on breaking down why this is bad from a purely artistic standpoint. I mean, you don't have to be a chef to say why the food tastes bad, but I'll let the people who are more experienced in that field uh give their perspective on that. If you want a more artistic breakdown of this, I recommend TB Skyen actually has a really good, very passionate crash out over this reveal, so go check out their video if you want an artist perspective. No, what I want to talk about is the more general kind of idea that I'm getting from this demonstration, because the mere fact that Nvidia released this advertisement, well, that's what it is, and thought that this was acceptable to show off in the first place, that they thought that this was so good that it was going to convince everybody like, oh, actually generative AI is cool. The fact that they thought that is a big sign of why I think generative AI is a inherently doomed technology, and that it is not like it is going to continue to improve on a technical level. It will get technically more complex and more advanced in many ways. It'll be doing more things like what it's doing here, but it won't get better, right? Because that's the thing. Every time someone criticizes how bad this Gen AI tech is, you always hear somebody from either side, really, point out that, well, it's the worst that it's ever going to be, right? Like, it's only going to get better as time goes on. And I can understand that reasoning. That's pretty much how all technology ever has worked out. But the core difference between generative AI and most other forms of technology is that normally when a technology is being developed, it's being made by people who understand how it works and what it needs to do and how they can improve it to better serve its functionality. Whereas generative AI self selects for the wrong kind of people to be making and using it. Like people that actually spend their lives, learning arts, they don't actually want to use these tools. They don't see generative AI as a way to make their lives faster or easier. They see it as taking the fun out of making art. A common misconception of how an artist, does their job, how they draw a piece of art, how they make a sculpture, is that they have a perfect image in their head, and that all that their skill is about just translating that image that is in their head into the physical world through whatever their medium of choice is, whether it's drawing it on a paper or carving it out of a marble statue or whatever. And that's just not how art is made. The reality is often that the artist, they'll have an idea of what they're going to make. I'm not saying artists don't have plans, but usually the art is found through the process of making it. There are entire art exercises that are literally just taking a doodle on a piece of paper and then turning that into a work of art. It's not just about, oh, I'm going to draw this perfect image I have. It's I want to draw a subject, but I'm going to, put some lines on paper. I'll sketch out the head, see if I like how it looks, maybe start doing some framing, and then if I don't like it or if I think things could be adjusted, then you erase lines and you draw it again with those adjustments in mind until you get something that you like. Even as like for me, like as a game designer and a programmer, I don't want to just press a button and have a game get made or a program get written. I want to go through the process of making the game myself because it is that process that is part of the art form. Lots of ideas sound good on paper but don't actually work so well when they're implemented, or maybe the process of implementing an idea, whether it's a work of art or a line of code or whatever, that process can help stimulate your brain and make you come up with ideas. When you go through the process, like just from my experience in the small projects I've been a part of so far, there have been times where while I was coding one mechanic, I was able to go, oh, wait a minute. If I code this a certain way, I could expand upon this mechanic and maybe add an entire new mechanic on top of it. And maybe that would be a cool addition to the game. And that's the kind of thing that you would miss out on if you just press a button and have an AI code it for you, right? Skipping out on the process of creation means you lose out on those like interesting possibilities that could have made your art better than you could have ever conceived at the start. The point I'm trying to get at is that because of this fact that I've been talking about, how the kinds of people that actually use AI are the kinds of people that don't care about creating art. They only want art to be created. The process has become irrelevant as long as more product gets made. And I mean, hell, a lot of these AI tech bros will literally brag about this mentality. They'll be like, "Oh, well, like I've always wanted to be an artist, but it was just like I never had the time for it between work and school, and it was always so boring to have to sit down and draw something for hours and hours and not even have it be that good." So like I like AI because it allows me to make art without all of those boring parts, you know. And as a result, it's these people that are hyping up AI, that are developing and giving feedback to AI, but they are also blind to this artistic process. They don't care why or how something gets made as long as it can be made with AI. And so when we think about this presentation, this slop-filled garbage from that perspective, all of a sudden this makes more sense, right? Like if you ignore context and why these games are designed the way they are designed, you could argue, not saying that they're correct, but they could argue that this post-processed version is technically better, right? When you compare, and forgive me, I don't play Resident Evil, but if you compare the character in the base version of the game to the quote unquote improved DLSS version, the colors are more saturated, their face is more clear in frame, their features are sharper, their contours are accentuated, the lighting is more direct on their face, they look more attractive in various ways. There are lots of things that in a vacuum would be good things to say about an image. But that's the problem. We're ignoring the actual context of why this image was made and replacing it with a completely different image that isn't better for the purpose that this scene was designed around. This person clearly isn't meant to look like a runway model. They're not meant to look like they're wearing makeup or that their face is like super highly detailed and mental. Like this is clearly a normal person, right? And this AI literally makes it look like a different actor, like a stunt double has come in and replaced them, and it doesn't even look like the same person anymore. The hair color looks completely different. The like it almost looks like her hair is like two-toned due to the weird lighting on it. The entire lighting of the scene is completely different. The scene is very darkly lit. It's a very, cast over dark rainy day. You can tell by all the umbrellas and everything. And yet in this version it almost looks like it's the middle of the day. Everything's so much more bright. The colors are more saturated. The fog that was in the background is gone entirely. You know, the light, the street light that was here is just off. It's a completely different time of day. It's a so many of the details of the scene are just lost in this AI translation. You know, another good example is down here at the bottom. Yeah, this one in particular. Like, so in this version of the scene, with the DLSS off, you can see that the sun is clearly coming from like this top left position over here, right? You can see the shadows being cast from the plants hanging down from here and the overhang over here. And then this side of the building is clearly much more darkly lit. But all that this AI cares about is ensuring that everything in the scene is very clear and visible. So when you apply this filter, all of a sudden all the shadows go away. You know, suddenly when before you could clearly tell that the sun was on this side of the building and this side was in shadow, now it almost looks like the sun is shining on both sides of the building. Like, I guess parts of this look a little bit darker, but it almost looks again, it looks like a completely different time of day. And it took me a second to even realize that the shadows that were here are even still there because they're almost entirely gone. In fact, a really, really bad example that they didn't even include on the website, which I think is really telling, is in the Digital Foundry video, there was this moment where you have this character here with this baseball cap that it's covering like half of his face in shadow, because that's what a baseball cap does. That's literally the point, is to shield your eyes from the sun. But then in the AI version, first of all, it kind of looks like he's wearing makeup, but all of a sudden, that entire shadow is just gone. It's been pushed up because it wants to highlight his face. It completely changed the lighting of the scene. So, like, not only does he look like a different person with different, like, contours, with makeup on, but it completely ignored the lighting. Like, the jacket, too. There's all of the shadows that his character model was casting onto himself are just gone entirely. You know, it completely ignores the context. And so, like I said, that it makes sense that an AI tech bro wouldn't notice that and would think that these are good examples to show off, because technically, you know, the face is more detailed, the pixels are brighter, there's a greater contrast, but they completely don't understand even the most basic, like, it doesn't maintain the integrity of the scene at all. And AI technology, again, naturally self-selects for the kinds of people that would think that this is good. If you like AI, chances are you are much more favorable towards these kinds of outputs than, like, this guy's skin color is completely different. And that's a real person too. Like, so, you know, and like that's the thing, right? You know, if you were hiring someone to design a car, would you want to hire someone who doesn't even have a driver's license to design your car? Like, would that make any sense? If you were, you know, a craftsman and you wanted a new set of power tools, would you want somebody who has never built anything more complex than like IKEA furniture to design a full suite of power tools for you? Of course not. Like, why would you? So, like, why does anybody think that people who aren't artists should be designing this tool to quote unquote make artists' job easier when they clearly don't even understand art? And I'm not even an artist, but I at least can recognize that I'm not an artist. I don't try to claim that I'm an artist, you know? But these people are like, oh, but we clearly know best. We can design the technology that can replace all artists everywhere. You know, we know on paper what makes for a good image. You know, these bright contours, these makeup models, these extra highlights that didn't exist in the original scene. I don't care what the original lighting was. Clearly, our technology knows better, you know. And if you don't mind me speculating about like what's going wrong from like a technical perspective, like I don't know what's going on under the hood, but I can speculate because like DLSS technology up until now, right, has been about just upscaling the resolution of an image. It takes the original image, and this is obviously an oversimplification, but it basically takes the frame that you were going to render already on your computer, spreads out the pixels, and then tries to fill in the gaps so that it's still the same exact image, just at a higher resolution. And we do this because it saves on performance. It's a lot easier to render because, like, obviously this isn't a free process, but you can then take, like, if you're rendering at like 1440p on a monitor, you could render the frame at like 720p and then use DLSS to turn that 720p image into a 1440p image. And the images would look functionally the same, just at a higher resolution. Because the original versions of DLSS, it's a vaguely similar technology to this generative AI stuff, but this obviously also predates, the massive boom in data centers and everything. And it works a little bit differently from how it started. But like they would literally train it on the games that they were designing it for. Like they would feed in footage of like Cyberpunk or Metro or whatever, and then it would use that data of what the game looks like at like 4K resolutions to then take those like 720p images and frames and then upres them to whatever higher resolution you wanted them to be at, and then you would get a better image for less performance. And that was a good use of this AI style technology, in my opinion. It worked, it did its job, it didn't try to change anything in the scene, it was purely an optimization tool. But what this is doing is that it is taking the original image and then using that as a basis to generate a wholly new image using this AI filter. And clearly, that generative AI is not trained on the games that it's adjusting. Like, I'm willing to bet this is using the same training data that, like, all of the other big, Gemini, Claude, GBT, whatever AIs are using all of those images. Because, like, when you think about, like, why the images look the way they do, it's because, like, chances are the vast majority of training data is going to be curated photographs. The kinds of photographs that you would use in advertisements, on magazines, in whatever kind of thing like that. And when you're trying to take a good photograph, you want to make sure that your subject is well lit, that you can see the details in their face. You add extra light sources so that you have more complex lighting that makes the image pop more and looks more interesting. But it's applying that logic of photography in a controlled setting for a specific purpose, and it's treating every game exactly the same as if it was in that setting. Sports game? Oh no, you're actually on the cover of a magazine for a sports game. Horror game? Oh no, 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 we can't have a dark, moody scene in a horror game. We need a brightly lit, highly contoured, makeup covered fashion model. You know, space sci-fi game where you're just talking to a normal person in a cafe. No, no, no. It needs to look like this is an advertisement for that cafe. It makes all of these games, and these games, have distinct art styles. They're all going for a vaguely realistic art style, but like I think you could firmly say that a game like Resident Evil and a game like Starfield are going for a different style, right? But the way the AI is treating these games, since it's treating them all the same, now this character in Starfield looks like they could stand next to this character from Resident Evil and they wouldn't look out of place from each other. And that's wrong, right? That shouldn't be happening. And yet they're acting like, oh no, this is better. And like, of course, the CEO came out recently talking about like, oh, because obviously there's been such a huge backlash that he had to make a response. and he tries to defend it, and it's like, oh no, you're wrong about the technology, because like it fuses the controllability of the geometry and textures and everything about the game with generative AI, which that's the problem. That does he realize that's the problem that everybody is saying? Like the first thing that everybody saw when they showed this off was, oh, they're taking the in-game assets and then fusing them with a generative AI output, and now everything just looks like AI slop. So he's literally saying what the problem is and acting like it's a positive, you know. And then he's talking about how like developers can fine tune the generative AI to try and make it match their style. And it's like, if I sell an artist a paintbrush, they don't have to ask me, hey, is this paintbrush going to paint what I tell it to paint? You know? if if that should you shouldn't be worried when you put out a tool to, by the way, this what happened to performance? Wasn't this a performance enhancing tool? Now all of a sudden DLSS has become this artistic filter instead of a performance tool. And then and now he has to ensure, oh no, you can totally tune it to make it look the way you want, as if like that shouldn't have been the default. Like the developers shouldn't have to take this tool and then have to futz with it and finagle it to actually get the output that they want. You know, if I open up Blender or Photoshop, by the way, I have an old version of Photoshop, not the modern Adobe BS. Like if I open up fucking Paint, right? I don't have to go like, oh, I hope that when I draw this line that it draws the pixels that I want it to draw, you know? But with this, like, you have to futz with it to even get it to look the way you want. And it's like, again, it's a tool being designed for artists by people who don't know how to make art. People who don't even want to make art. And it's no wonder that this is as bad as it is. But I guess, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. But I mean, I don't even know what else there is to say. This is just, it's so bad. And it's so obviously bad. And it's so appalling that they would even show this off. But like I said, it makes sense when you have people who are not artists, who are not interested in making art, making these tools. Of course, they don't understand that this is bad. And it's like that's the core thing. Like, in theory, if they got like actual artists to develop these AI tools, they might actually get to a point where they could actually replace like an artist. Maybe, I don't know. But artists aren't going to want to do that, and so they have to try and develop this tool without the people that they need in order to make it good. So all that they can do is just throw more training data at it, just blindly buy up all of the RAM and GPUs and just brute force the problem. But the problem they're trying to brute force is the most human thing of creating art. So, like, the technology will always get better in the sense that it will have more power thrown at it. It will have more training data fed into this machine. They'll always build another, water and power wasting data center. But they're not going to get an artist to actually, you know, improve it. And so of course it's just going to fall apart. And I don't think this technology has a meaningful future in any way. I mean, it shouldn't in the first place. But even with the trillions of dollars being thrown at it, I don't think that this is going to ever pay off in the way that these companies think it is. But if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. And I've also got a Ko-Fi if you want to help support the channel and me as a human creator more directly. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one with hopefully a brighter topic to talk about.